Rudy Gobert is a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, but no one seems to think that he's a good defender.
Oh, me personally, I'm not a Gobert fan on the defensive end. I
You
think
think it's a little overrated on that side?
yeah, I definitely think so.
Oh, Rudy?
Yes.
Thank you.
All they show is the meme you ever seen when Jokic was like, brother, I have 47 points. That's all I see every time Rudy Gobert guard him. I mean, why is he guarding him, bro? Cat
much,
do a
bro.
better job. Nas do a better job. Kyle Anderson does a better job.
Because when a guy is tested, you're not seeing it from Rudy Gobert in the postseason. I get it.
We've
And look,
never seen
I don't
it.
think
Ever.
Honestly, I get it. In Utah, Rudy Gobert had won 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, but the Jazz defense was continuously getting picked apart in the playoffs. Now, as many people have pointed out, a large part of that was because he had no other players that could play defense or even wanted to try. Back in the 2021 playoffs, this was in full effect when Paul George and Reggie Jackson would continue to drive by their matchup, pulling Gobert in to help and allowing Terrence Mann to go for 40 points to eliminate the Jazz. It was even worse in 2022 when the Mavericks without Luka Doncic carved up the Jazz defense by doing the same exact thing, which neutralized most of Gobert's defensive prowess. So when he got traded to Minnesota, it looked like he got what he wanted. He has great perimeter defenders with Ant and Jaden McDaniels, and for most of the year, Rudy Gobert was the player that was as advertised and won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year. But once it got to the Western Conference Finals, Luka Doncic picked apart Minnesota's defense, and Rudy Gobert again couldn't do anything about it. So, despite a roster upgrade, it appears that didn't solve the problem, which leads to 2 important questions. Is Rudy Gobert a defensive liability come playoff time? And if not, where is the misunderstanding? All season, Minnesota wanted to play drop coverage because they wanted opposing guards to challenge Rudy Gobert. They would funnel the guard into the paint and allow Gobert to take care of the rest. Because Gobert could essentially guard the ball handler and his man at the same time, the Wolves never had to send help. And with this strategy, the Timberwolves had by far the best defense in the league, and it looked like they couldn't be picked apart. In the playoffs, that had continued in the first 2 series against the Phoenix Suns and the Denver Nuggets. But Gobert then appeared to struggle against the Mavericks. And when you compare how Luka Doncic and others tried attacking Rudy Gobert, it starts to become clear why the results were so different. You see, most ball handlers in the league think that they can challenge Rudy Gobert with his quickness, but that's playing right into Gobert's strengths. He has quick feet for a 7-footer, and his length is able to give him a cushion. So unless you're going to try to shoot over a 7-foot frame, you're going to have to try and get past him. Devin Booker and Bradley Beal tried doing this numerous times, but because they knew Gobert was coming from behind, you often saw them kicking the ball out instead of trying to finish around the rim. Here's one with Kevin Durant trying to sauce Gobert up, and he gets a slight step on him, but then he rushes it at the rim because Gobert's coming and misses the layup. In the Denver series, Jamal Murray also tried pulling Gobert to the perimeter, but had a ton of trouble getting around him and ended up having to take a lot of tough shots. But against the Dallas Mavericks, it was a different story. Even though Minnesota had great perimeter defenders, Luka was still able to continuously put Gobert in 2-on-1 situations, which was similar to what was happening in Utah. But how? Luka is built differently than most ball handlers. While most are smaller and shiftier, Luka's size allows him to put his defender on his back and patiently wait for Gobert to react. As McDaniels tries to get back in front, Luka will have him at his hip, which allows him to get good position for an open shot. And because the Timberwolves don't like to help, Gobert is now faced with his decision between committing to Luka or trying to stay with this matchup. I mentioned earlier that Gobert had been really adept at guarding multiple players at once, but Luka's a bit different. His patience allows him to keep the pass and shot alive as long as possible, which then keeps Gobert guessing. Here's one where Luka rejects Derrick Jones' ball screen, and he looks like he's going to pass it, which makes Gobert retreat, and that opens up a layup at the rim. On this one, Luka runs the pick and roll and he puts McDaniels on his back. Then he surveys, and as he realizes that Gobert is retreating, he settles into that step back jumper. Compared to here where the Suns run a dribble handoff into a pick and roll, but instead of sealing his defender, Bradley Beal tries to rush to the basket. That essentially closes off any realistic pass, and Gobert can now fully sell out to Beal. So because Luka was able to break through the heart of Minnesota's defense numerous times, Minnesota had an interesting decision to make. Either they could keep allowing Luka to get these paint floaters and jumpers, or try and make an adjustment. And that's where the real problem began. Minnesota panicked. Minnesota elected to make an adjustment on the pick and roll, but there were a few issues. When they didn't want to play drop coverage, they primarily went to the blitz. This means Gobert would come up and essentially trap Luka to get the ball out of his hands. That forces either Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford to get the ball and make a play. They're not as good as Luka with their playmaking, so in theory, this strategy makes sense. But 90% of Rudy Gobert's defensive strengths come from being a great rim protector. Not only is he really good at challenging guards at the rim, in fact, most guards are scared to even put up a shot. But Gobert has to be at the rim to have that effect. So when he's blitzing, Minnesota is essentially taking their best defender out of the possession. Then it's up to the weaker defenders to cover those gaps. And that's where it felt like the Wolves didn't have a true goal in mind. On a lot of these possessions, Minnesota would simply rotate to the man with the ball, which allowed a ton of corner threes. But if you just looked at the shooting stats for Dallas's role players, guys like PJ Washington and Derrick Jones shoot much more poorly from the wing instead of the corner. So not only was Minnesota giving up their best rim protector, they were also letting Dallas take the shots in their sweet spots. At that point, I was thinking that Minnesota should just take Rudy Gobert off the floor. If your center is always on the perimeter and behind the play, what's the point of having his defensive presence? And that's when it got me thinking. Regardless of the opponent, team, or strategy in place, shouldn't you be making a significant impact if you're truly a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year? In essence, what I really wanted to know was whether or not Minnesota truly needed him. The best way to understand his impact is through on and off numbers. Now, numbers in the playoffs are definitely noisy because of small sample size, but at least gives us some idea of what's happening on the court. And in that 5-game series against Dallas, Minnesota had a 126 defensive rating with Gobert on the court. But that defensive rating was at 132 when he was off the court. So could it be possible that we missed something? After watching all of his minutes off the court, there was one thing that was pretty clear. Dallas was much more comfortable attacking the rim at will. While Naz Reid and Cat aren't bad defenders, they don't have the help instincts that Rudy Gobert does. So Dallas would just drive with a lot of open space and score around the rim. To put things in perspective, just in game 1 alone, Gobert sat out for 10 minutes and the Wolves gave up 9 layups. This was even more obvious against the Denver Nuggets. In that series, a lot of people thought that Gobert was a defensive liability because he couldn't guard Nikola Jokic one-on-one. In fact, there are times where Jokic was picking Gobert out, especially in Game 5, and Jokic scored 42 points. But let's first look at the on and off numbers. When Rudy Gobert is off the court, the Timberwolves' defensive rating was at 119, but with him on, it was down to 108. So what's the deal? Nikola Jokic doesn't actually care who's guarding him. It's the help defenders that he's way more concerned about. So when he has someone like Karl Anthony Towns, that usually means Rudy Gobert is right behind him waiting for Jokic. So not only does Jokic need to get by his matchup, he also needs to figure out where Gobert is. But when Jokic has Gobert, he knows that he's getting one-on-one coverage. That then allows him to get more space, and now he can go to his moves. But what people didn't want to focus on was the amount of times Gobert had defended multiple actions at once in that same game. So here, Jokic cuts to the rim so Gobert slides over to protect the paint. Then after the pass, he contests Gordon's layup. Then on the next possession, Jokic uses the pick and roll to get by Towns. Gobert comes to contest, and as Jokic wraps the pass around him, Gordon's going for the dunk, but Gobert beautifully blocks it at the rim. But when Gobert is on the bench, Jokic is able to pick Naz Reid and Cat apart. While they have had their moments against him, the overall team defense breaks down a lot easier. Guards are more confident than ever attacking the rim, and Minnesota's 2 big men don't have the instincts to account for multiple things on one possession. And again, it's because they're not used to all the help responsibilities that Gobert has to cover. So the numbers in film seem to line up with this idea that not only is he making an impact on the floor, he's very much needed. But why is the discourse around him so different compared to other great defenders like Anthony Davis and Draymond Green? Overall, I think that people are capable of understanding what's happening, but not why it's happening. The biggest problem that others seem to have with Gobert is this idea that he's always being hunted in the playoffs. And it makes sense because when you hunt someone, you're typically looking for a weaker defender. But when Luka and Jokic had spent a lot of their respective series seeking Gobert out, what I think people didn't realize is that they're doing this so that Gobert can't do what he does best, protect the rim. Now that might sound like an excuse, until you realize that other great big man defenders get hunted like this too. If you remember, the Warriors and Lakers played each other in the 2023 conference semifinals, and just like with Gobert, the Lakers wanted Anthony Davis to stay in the paint. So what did the Warriors do then? Well, they continuously attacked Anthony Davis in pick and roll with Steph Curry and found a lot of success from it. With Davis up, it opens up the short roll game, and with Davis out of the paint, the Warriors are then able to get more shots around the paint. And I think it's inarguable that AD is the Lakers' best defender, but Steph wanted to attack him specifically because Davis is now pulled away from the rim. If you're not convinced yet, let me show you another case study with Draymond Green. In 2022, the Celtics went at Draymond Green continuously in isolation, specifically Jaylen Brown. And on one of these possessions, Derek White wanted to bring Steph Curry in the pick and roll, but Brown waves them away to go at Draymond, and he eventually scores. And again, it's for the same reason. They don't want Draymond in the paint, so they would rather attack him in space. My point here is that other amazing defenders get hunted just like Rudy Gobert did by Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic. But people seem to treat Gobert differently from Draymond or Anthony Davis. And I think I know why. Rudy Gobert is paid very handsomely to be the best defender in the league, which means a lot of people expect him to be a superhuman defender. I think that's an unrealistic expectation, but I understand why people feel this way. Unlike Anthony Davis and Draymond Green, Rudy Gobert doesn't really offer much value on the offensive end. To keep it short, he wants to be a finesse player, but he doesn't have the skills to show for. So because he's offensively inept, his entire value on his contract is coming on the defensive end. And when you have won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, you have to show more defensively than other great defenders who can score if you're getting paid the same, like Anthony Davis. What does this mean then? Rudy Gobert, in my opinion, is not a defensive liability. He's a great player that helps raise a team's floor defensively, but is viewed differently because of a difference in expectations and a limited offensive skill set. Whether or not he is overpaid or the best defender in the league is arguable, but what is clear to me is that Rudy Gobert is not only a great defensive player, but also the most misunderstood player in the NBA right now. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If so, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.